Jackson, who had been relentlessly throwing daggers, hurled a silenced knife straight at the Count's forehead. The dagger flew silently, but exploded with a loud bang just before reaching the Count's face. With the explosion, a black curtain of energy flickered in front of the Count. The barrier was still intact. A dagger wrapped in a scroll wasn't enough to break through. Don't expect forgiveness. Deanne Molson, who had always viewed the world with ease, felt a wave of urgency as he found himself cornered at the edge of a cliff. Sweat dripped down his back. This was the first time he'd faced such a situation, his first real experience of danger. It caused him to lose his composure. The Count had already cast spells far beyond those of a typical wizard. Now he was even drawing on his own lifespan. He summoned more specters, rolling his eyes back. His eyes, now pitch black, turned toward Jackson. Jackson felt a horrifying chill emanating from the hole in his abdomen.
Huh?
His legs nearly gave out, but Jackson managed to hold on. After all, there were two people standing nearby who would have loved to see him fall. Die. The Count raised his staff, muttering repeatedly as he glared at Jackson. Jackson stared back, despite the pitch blackness of the Count's eyes, making it impossible to discern the pupils or whites. The gaze was unnervingly persistent. With each word the Count uttered, the cold creeping up from Jackson's stomach intensified. It became harder and harder to stay standing. Jackson dropped to one knee, hitting the ground with his palm, closing his eyes. He had to resist the cold. As he focused, he could hear Rem muttering beside him.
Yes, that's it. Crazy barbarian.
Jackson thought to himself, refocusing his mind. The Count had cast some kind of spell, planting something in Jackson's wound. He just had to find it and dig it out. Jackson began to concentrate on his own body, endurance to withstand the pain, calmness to observe his body, and finally sensitivity. One more thing to add, an indomitable will.
There is no such thing as giving up.
Jackson had learned something from Enkrid as well. Even though it was the first time he'd encountered such a spell, there had to be a solution. From what he knew, from what he'd experienced, and through logical deduction, he would find a conclusion. So, Jackson knelt and endured, while his friends faced the immediate danger head-on. Enkrid took 3 steps forward, steps aimed directly at the Count. He was now within sword's reach. Thanks to the company members who had continually cast spells and kept the Count busy. Now that the distance was closed, Enkrid placed his hand on the sword grip and spoke.
You're already within my domain.
3 sat and 1 stood. All eyes were on Enkrid. Even the Count looked at him. Domain? He was talking about sword range. The Count scoffed. He trusted the defensive spells surrounding him. Enkrid adjusted his breathing. Passing through 10,000 specters had been an ordeal. His muscles trembled from fatigue, but that was fine. This wasn't the first time he'd been pushed to his limits. When wielding the sword, such moments happened frequently, especially back when he had nothing. He had to swing his sword until his muscles tore. Otherwise, he could never have even reached out for the dreams he held. What must one do to keep reaching out, even when it's beyond sight? Repeat and repeat again. That experience was the key. Because of it, he could now push himself beyond limits. Enkrid could still endure. His gaze rested on the black curtain in front of the Count. Enkrid had already seen Jackson strike at the barrier once, giving him a rough idea of its strength.
Even if a thrown dagger couldn't pierce it.
It could still be cut, but not with an ordinary slash. Cutting required absolute focus and certainty. Therefore,
Ragna, I'll borrow this once.
Before Ragna could even respond, Enkrid once again mimicked the technique he had failed at countless times before. He lifted the sword as if to pierce the sky. Both hands gripped the hilt, and he relaxed his shoulders. A middle sword technique, upper stance, specifically a stance modified from an ancient family swordsmanship style from the north. Ragna's family name was Zaun. The swordsmanship stance passed down in the House of Zaun was something Ragna had recklessly altered. Enkrid didn't know that. All he knew was that he was ready to swing his sword. Ragna looked at Enkrid with a slightly surprised expression.
Not bad.
His stance, momentum, and will. There was nothing to criticize. It was the best stance Enkrid had ever taken, especially since he was imitating something of his own. It made Ragna feel even more impressed. Ragna wasn't the only one surprised. Rem had been astonished ever since they started fighting the horde of Spectre soldiers.
He never got pushed back, not even once.
Enkrid had kept pace with him and Ragna. It was now hard to even recall their former captain.
This is fun. This is really fun.
Rem thought, tightening his grip on his axe, ready to throw it in case things went awry. Auden, unable to use his hands, muttered prayers with his mouth. The pain felt as though it was shattering his skull, but Auden endured, praying.
As the Father watches, the lamb sheds its wool and becomes the shepherd.
And the shepherd is the one who strikes and corrects what is wrong. The forbidden magic was no joke. If something went wrong, the pain could drive one mad. Many who lacked discipline had fallen to that fate, but he had to do what needed to be done. That was what Auden had learned from watching Enkrid. Jackson slowly pierced his own stomach with Carmen's stiletto. He avoided his internal organs, aiming for the source of the cold. He suppressed the chill and looked forward. Though the blade had stabbed into his abdomen, it wasn't fatal. He'd avoided his organs, and with the right treatment, it would be fine. Moreover, the stab wasn't deep. He also reflected on his own carelessness.
That was sloppy.
He hadn't fully utilized his assassination skills. Why was it that his teacher's teachings suddenly came to mind?
Do you want to give your best? Then first find a place to settle.
Why would his master say something like that? He was the one destined to inherit Gior's dagger after all. Didn't he already have a place to call home? If he fully gave in to enjoying the fight, he would become addicted to killing. That's what his master had said. Jackson had, in fact, felt such emotions before. How could he? Random thoughts were piling up. Jackson decisively cut off his thoughts. This wasn't the time for that. He looked ahead. He saw the captain, who no longer even needed his help. The captain's back filled his entire field of vision. He was preparing to swing his sword.
Damn you bastards.
The Count steadied his breath. He had been pushed back repeatedly, but seeing his enemies fall one by one gave him a sense of calm. His gaze turned to Enkrid. The Count knew how to handle a sword. Watching Enkrid take his stance, the Count thought he couldn't afford to let him take the first strike. The flickering black curtain of his barrier rendered most attacks useless. Calculating his chances, the Count thrust his sword forward first. He pushed off the ground, driving his blade forward. It was a flawless thrust. The tip of the sword, as small as a point, flew straight toward Enkrid. It was precise and clear, fast and powerful. Enkrid calmly struck down the Count's sword. The Count quickly tried to recover his sword to swing again. Enkrid mimicked Ragna's severance technique for a moment. Enkrid's foot pushed off the ground as he moved forward. Simultaneously, his shoulders rotated smoothly, and his sword's direction changed, pivoting around his waist. The sword that had blocked the Count's thrust now glided like a fish in water, redirecting smoothly. The heart of great strength surged, adding power and will.
Cut.
It was the will of severance. Enkrid's sword leveled horizontally with the ground, slicing past the Count's nose. The barrier was cut. Will is the strength of intention. The will of severance sliced through the barrier and cleaved the Count's skull. The silver blade that split the skull shattered and flew into pieces. Enkrid, still in the posture of his slash, exhaled the breath he had been holding. Standing with both hands gripping the sword, his eyes seemed to glow a bright blue. In the black world created by the Count, Enkrid's glowing blue eyes made it seem as though he stood in a world all his own.
Ah.
Enkrid exhaled, feeling the pain in his arm muscles, lowering the half-broken sword and turning around. The Count had lost the top of his head. From an observer's point of view, it seemed like a very simple exchange of sword strikes. Enkrid had deflected the thrusting sword with his own, not pulling back to reset his stance, but smoothly transitioning into a horizontal upper slash. The Count didn't even have time to think about defending. He was struck down without resistance. It was partly the same technique Ragna had shown earlier, infused with the will of severance. That's why Enkrid had said he was borrowing it.
Gurkhe.
Blood bubbled up from the Count's mouth. Though a treacherous mastermind who had overturned the nation of Norilia, death is a fate that comes equally to all. Even a stray arrow can kill a man, and no one could survive having their head severed. Blood poured down from the Count's severed head, flowing thick and red even in the darkness. And then something strange happened.
This cannot end like this.
Once again a voice rang out, piercing through the mind. The Count, though dead, spoke. His voice had split into two, overlapping and echoing. As blood flowed down his face, his mouth continued to speak clearly. Auden, realizing what was happening, began to suspect the truth.
Is this?
A foreboding sensation, like something from deep within the demon realm, pressed against his skin.
A demon.
While Auden muttered to himself, black smoke began to seep out from the Count's body.
Though not 100,000, you did cut down 10,000, so I respect that. In recognition, I grant you a deep curse. A witch?
Just as the black smoke began to form into a human shape, after Auden mentioned a demon, the sound of thunder rumbled through the clouds. The black smoke froze, unable to fully take form. Enkrid, still holding his broken sword, looked at it. Raindrops began to fall.
You've been caught.
Both the decapitated Count and the demon that hadn't fully manifested spoke at the same time. Their voices overlapped. Enkrid now understood why the Count's voice had occasionally doubled. It was because he had harbored a demon, but that didn't change anything. Enkrid discarded the broken silver sword and drew his gladius. With the gladius as a distraction, the real strike would be Ember. In an instant, Enkrid calculated the course of the fight. While everyone else was still in shock, he alone prepared for the next battle, causing the demon's gaze to shift back toward him.
You arrogant fool.
There was no emotion in the demon's tone. Not that it mattered. Enkrid was simply trying to finish a fight that wasn't yet over, especially since all of his company members were either injured or exhausted. It meant he was the only one left who could step up. At this point, one might wonder if this was an insurmountable wall, but Enkrid didn't think so. In every moment, he did his utmost. That's how he had lived, and that's what he would do now. Beyond the mental world, the ferryman laughed.
Indeed.
Clearly, this man was truly insane. The Count had extraordinary talent, and his ambition far surpassed human limits. That's how he had obtained and indulged in the heart of a demon. The demon, ignoring the mad swordsman charging at him, watched the witch's handiwork with mild interest as he spoke.
If you block my final curse, won't I feel a bit disappointed?
His tone was light, but the meaning behind the word demon was far more significant. A creature of the highest danger, something only seen in the demon realm. Intelligent beings, exceptional in tormenting and killing humans.
A demon, huh?
Enkrid muttered, and the demon's gaze turned toward him.
You, yes. You were impressive, human. But it seems that even if you wanted to fight now, you wouldn't be able to.
The demon didn't know the full path Enkrid had walked, but it understood what he had accomplished today. After all, everything had centered around this human. Even the witch, who had just intervened. Wasn't she also one of his people?
If you touch him, I'll hunt you down and kill you.
The witch's voice reached the demon across space. Even as a demon, it had no desire for annihilation, so the threat was unsettling.
Arrogant witch.
From the black mist, only something resembling an eye emerged, surveying the scene with a dull gaze. The moment Enkrid sensed the entity, he felt a strange awareness. It was certain this was no human. But did that mean it couldn't be cut? Was that really the case? The demon said it wouldn't fight, but was that true? Should he try cutting it? Those thoughts flashed through his mind. Gathering his remaining strength to charge, Enkrid felt the demon's gaze land on him. Up until now, its tone had been playful, but this time it was different.
We'll meet again.
Through the mist, Enkrid could vaguely make out the figure, but it was too unclear to recognize.
I am the master of 10,000 specters.
The demon spoke, and its form began to dissipate. The falling raindrops grew heavier, making it impossible for it to remain. The witch had summoned the rain through her magic. As a natural phenomenon, it erased any artificial traces. Moreover, the rain was warm. The witch had partially opened her magical realm, filling the rain with her power. The demon vanished. The rain washed away the magical world that Diane Molson had created to manifest the specters in this land. Before disappearing, the demon took its heart, reading the final command of its servant and sacrifice.
And listen nearer.
Diane Molson's final grievance.
Do you think life in this world is that easy?
The Count died, expressing his frustration, but at this point, there was nothing he could do. It was a message only the demon could hear. The last remnants of the servant's spirit were soon erased. The demon clicked its tongue, frustrated that it had lost the chance to leave a significant mark on the human world. As the part of its soul that had inhabited the servant was about to completely vanish, the demon turned to look at the one who had slain him. Black hair and blue eyes.
Enkrid.
It had heard someone call his name, so it remembered that as well. The demon thought to itself that if they ever met again, it would torment him until he begged for death. Enkrid lifted his head towards the falling rain. The rain, falling with a steady pitter-patter, washed away the blood that clung to his body. It felt like it was embracing his weary form, offering comfort. It reminded him of the feeling he sometimes got when holding Esther in his arms as he slept. It was similar to that.
Did Esther do something?
It seemed that way. The Count's reaction and the demon's words made it clear. The rain didn't stop, though it grew heavier. Rainwater pooled on the ground, washing away the blood and forming light streams. He had cut through 10,000 specters to strike down the Count. It sounded simple when said like that, but it was far from a simple task. It was no small feat. It was a tremendous achievement. Enkrid caught his breath in the downpour and gathered up the broken half of silver. He then moved his creaking body as he looked at the corpse of the fallen Count. Auden, too, finally began to move, freed from the paralysis caused by the curse.
Well done, brother. You too.
It was a plain exchange. Auden walked over to the fallen Count, step by step. He knelt on one knee and clasped his hands in prayer. It was a priest's duty to offer prayers for the dead. Even if their life had been full of sin, he hoped they would remain by the Lord's side and be given a chance for repentance.
May you stay by the Lord's side and receive his teachings.
The god Auden believed in took pleasure in punishing sinners. His teachings were more akin to beating someone with fists. The Lord's hands and feet would help the sinner in their repentance, or so it was said.
May you find peace there.
Would he really? Enkrid thought as he listened. Ragnar stood up, swaying slightly. Though he didn't groan, his body was far from normal. He had pushed himself too far. His sword was broken, and most of the protective gear wrapped around his body had been torn or shattered. Luckily, there was no one left to mock him for it. Jackson also had a hole in his stomach, yet his face remained calm. He was slowly pushing himself off the ground with his hands.
It's over.
When he spoke, there was a faint sense of mixed emotions. It was rare for him to reveal any feelings. Did he want to deliver the final blow himself? Maybe. The rain kept falling. Enkrid looked at Rem, who was still sitting there, unable to get up on his own. Rem, in turn, looked back at Enkrid. "Why aren't you getting up?" Enkrid asked with his eyes. Rem, after much hesitation, finally opened his mouth.
Captain,
What?
grant me the honor of carrying me.
He was saying he couldn't walk on his own.
You can't walk after that much?
Ragnar, apparently unable to hold back, chimed in.
Weakling.
Jackson added his own remark.
Seems like someone didn't train enough.
Auden's concern echoed loudly.
The captain will be grateful to me, so I'm just giving him the chance.
Of course, none of their words could penetrate Rem's thick skin. Enkrid couldn't fully understand the situation, but he knew Rem had pushed himself harder than anyone. In fact, that was the truth. Even before the battle formation had been established, Rem had used a spell, one that borrowed power from another source. It was one of the most dangerous things to do in sorcery. It was akin to stealing another's wishes. What Rem had done was forcibly use a totem crafted by the Madman of Immortality for his own purposes. The backlash from such reckless usage was inevitable. On top of that, he was the central mediator of the battle formation. It was more taxing than even Auden's role as the foundation. It was no wonder his body was screaming in pain. If he forced his body to endure the damage, he could stand up and walk, but Rem didn't particularly want to. He figured he'd done enough to deserve being carried.
Besides, it could be fun.
He was also eager to recover his strength quickly. He had watched Enkrid's final strike, the one that had cut down the Count.
If I recover quickly, I can spar with him again sooner.
Ram, who had slowly become more like Enkrid, also wanted to cross swords with him. He wanted to do it properly, with a fully healed body. So he was determined to be carried. Despite his calm tone, Rem's eyes were burning with determination. His desire to be carried seemed strong enough to evaporate the rain around him.
Does my body look fine to you?
Enkrid asked calmly.
Better than me.
Rem responded confidently. Truly a crazy bastard. Even so, Enkrid was about to carry him after all. Rem had earned it. Fortunately, there was no need to carry him himself.
I'll carry him.
When did they arrive? It was Dunbachel and Teresa. The two had run over, catching their breath. Dunbachel stepped forward.
Go ahead.
Rem didn't argue. In truth, it didn't matter who carried him. Dunbachel hoisted Rem onto her back, and Enkrid roughly gathered up their surroundings. The rain continued to fall. Enkrid and his companions began walking back toward the Allied camp. The path through the specters hadn't been as long as they had thought. It had seemed like a long way when they were cutting their way in, but now on the way back, it felt short. The enemy was silent, and the Allies even more so. They walked back down the same path they had carved out with their own hands. Everyone watched them, but Enkrid and his party didn't care about the stares of others. Up ahead, Krang approached. He was soaked to the bone from the rain, but he didn't look like a drenched rat. He wasn't smiling, nor was he reveling in the victory. It was impossible to tell what he was thinking just from his expression. His pupils were trembling slightly. While his attitude and face remained composed, the emotions in his eyes were not so easily concealed. Just before the Count died, the soldiers were fighting not only against the specter-possessed soldiers, but also against the spirits trying to take over their own bodies. They fought and fought, held on and endured.
When will this end?
Their physical limits were reached.
Maybe dying would be easier.
Their mental limits were at breaking point. Their strength and willpower had reached their end, and the Spectre soldiers, seemingly without fear, continued to charge endlessly. These creatures did not differentiate between Kingdom soldiers or the Count's forces. In the face of this wave of spirits, the two armies mixed and fought together. Even those who had performed heroically were nearing their limits. Meanwhile, the soldiers were plagued by horrific nightmares and illusions.
Die.
But that wasn't a nightmare or illusion. It was the sight of those battling Count Molson. Esther's spell had influenced the battle, and it intertwined with the Count's incantations, creating a bizarre situation. Most of the soldiers present had witnessed Enkrid's fight. Marcus had seen it too.
Win.
He silently urged. Asia had also seen it, clenching her fist.
I should have been there.
Still, he couldn't withdraw just yet. Even though some shepherd nobody was making a name for himself if he left, the prince would be in danger. Unlike Asia, Dunbachel and Teresa ran into action as soon as they assessed the situation. They were the ones who needed to be there, whether it was as human shields or to deliver a surprise strike. Andrew couldn't move. Esther had yet to wake up, and he had decided his duty was to guard this place, so he could only watch. The soldiers didn't even have the strength to shout in victory. Most of them collapsed, coughing up their breath. Even those who had held on until now sat down where they stood. They didn't have the energy to cheer for their victory. Their bodies became soaked as the rain continued to fall. At least the rain was falling. That was something to be thankful for. It almost felt like the aura of the specters clinging to their bodies was being washed away, and in fact, that was true. It was because of what Esther had done. In the real world, Esther had already understood what had happened. The Count had tried to summon the realm of spells into this land, but was that even possible? No, it wasn't. The demon's power had intervened, but in the end it had been a foolish act. Even if the Count had succeeded, that wretched wizard would have been possessed and repeatedly committed more idiotic acts. For example, he would have turned all the kingdom's citizens into test subjects, just like he had with the Chimera. Perhaps he would have done something even worse. That's the nature of a demon's whispers. Since she couldn't dispel every single curse imbued with the demon's power, Esther had used the majority of her spells to make it rain. During that process, the soldiers probably saw visions of the Count. Esther had seen it too, that madman who had cut down the Count and nearly the demon as well. Esther felt the need to tell them just how dangerous the demon had been. Meanwhile, Krang, watching Enkrid's battle, muttered silently to himself. His hands weren't sweating, he was simply waiting. There was nothing he could do in this moment. Did that make him feel powerless? No, he had his own stage. This was just the moment for his friend to take the spotlight. So all Krang could do was trust, and trust again.
I believe in you.
His faith wasn't betrayed, his trust was rewarded. As the rain poured down, the specters vanished. Krang stepped forward amidst the soldiers who had survived. Without a word, he walked out.
Lord.
Marcus called after him, but he didn't stop. Krang only halted when he stood face to face with Enkrid, who was walking back. After a brief pause, he spoke.
Praise the hero who saved us.
His voice was low and quiet. Marcus, who had followed behind him, agreed with the sentiment, and he wasn't the only one. Asia, limping behind, also nodded in agreement. Looking at Enkrid, Krang took a deep breath and put strength into his voice. Apparently, his voice had been too soft.
Praise the hero who saved us.
His voice rang out. It was one of Krang's specialties, a shout that erupted with force from his chest.
Ugh.
One soldier lifted his head, crying as the rain drenched his face.
Ooh, we survived. For the hero, for the Mad Company.
The shouts mixed and became a jumbled mess of unintelligible words. It was a cry so powerful that it felt as if the rain itself might scatter widely. Such was the fervor. At the center of that fervor, an old commander was displeased with the disorganized shouting. Had they not all witnessed it? The Count transforming into a demon, and the hero who had cut him down. With all his heart, the commander shouted,
Everyone, repeat after me.
Many soldiers followed him. He was a great leader who had shown how to endure even in the face of an overwhelming assault by specters. He was undoubtedly a hero to them as well.
Demon Slayer.
The slayer of demons. Spread the fame of the one who cut down the demon. At the commander's words, the surrounding soldiers shouted as well.
Demon Slayer.
Their chant quickly spread to those around them.
Demon Slayer, the slayer of demons.
The rain continued to fall. At first it had responded to Esther's magic, but now it was the rain that was naturally meant to fall. In other words, there were no bright rays of sunlight, just a sky covered in dark clouds. Yet everyone saw something shining. If the person who killed a demon, banished the specters, and ended the war didn't shine, then who would?
Demon Slayer.
If the demon who wasn't actually dead heard this, it would probably grind its sharp fangs in frustration at such a title. Enkrid, listening blankly to all of this, remarked,
I didn't actually kill the demon. Technically, Noble Slayer would be more accurate.
Rem added, sticking to the facts.
Or demon's servant slayer, to be precise.
Auden chimed in. From a religious standpoint, the nature of their opponent was clear. At least it was in Auden's view.
Does it matter?
Ragnar dismissed all the nonsense with his calm remark. As usual, Jackson remained silent. Dunbachel for a moment considered how severe Rem's revenge would be if she threw him off her back, but decided against it. Teresa, deep down, agreed with Auden. Krang finally showed a gentle smile. Each one of them was deserving of the title hero, and by the time they had reached the capital, everyone knew just how crazy these guys were.
They're all equally mad.
Krang smiled as he thought this. Enkrid nodded calmly, not reading Krang's thoughts, but convinced that he was the most sane of them all.
Thanks, you biggest lunatic.
But Enkrid almost lost his composure at Krang's next words. He had been ready to fight again when the Count had transformed into a demon, but this left him speechless. Who was the biggest lunatic?
You've become a hero who saved the nation.
Krang continued, bowing his head, a gesture of utmost respect from the prince, the future king, and the surrounding soldiers were all watching. Enkrid was utterly exhausted. He didn't have the energy to care about princes or anything else.
Enough.
He gripped the prince's shoulder and pulled him up. He had done his job. The praise filled his heart with pride, and Krang's respectful demeanor wasn't bad either. But there was one thing he had to ask.
Why am I the biggest lunatic?
There's Rem, after all. Krang burst out laughing at his friend's question.
Ha ha ha, let's go. Eat, drink, and rest. You can even bankrupt the royal treasury if you want.
Amid the cries of Demon Slayer, the shouts of survival and victory echoed. The once enemy soldiers of the Count's army quietly laid down their weapons. The civil war was over. The Count likely summoned a specter in the end, as Enkrid noticed that a musty smell lingered on his body.
Hot water and a bath, please. No need for any attendants.
As soon as Enkrid returned to the palace, he bathed, ate, and slept. Rem, Ragnar, Auden, and Jackson were no different. It was only after a deep sleep that they woke. A healer approached them in the meantime, offering to treat everyone's wounds, but all of them refused.
I know my own body best.
Rem said this and turned away.
It's the punishment I deserve.
Auden was no different. Ragnar waved his hand, declining, and Jackson acted as if he wasn't hurt at all. The healer, muttering that this was the first time they had dealt with such stubborn patients, turned to leave. Just as they were walking away, the healer bowed their head towards Enkrid.
Thank you.
It was an unexpected remark, however. The healer's demeanor was entirely serious. Enkrid hadn't fully grasped what he had done yet. It had been too exhausting a campaign to reflect. Just because the battle was over didn't mean there was nothing left to do. Preparing for war was a greater task than the war itself, and even greater was the cleanup afterward. There was a saying, "A general who fights well can win battles, but a general who prepares well can win a war, and a general who cleans up well after a battle can truly win the war." That's how important it was to manage the aftermath of combat. It was the same now. The handling of the remaining Count's forces was still an issue. Fallen equipment needed to be retrieved, and the camp had to be packed up. Once all that was done, the march awaited them. They still had to return to the palace, after all. Even though there was joy in victory, the fact that they had accomplished this in just 3 days was remarkable. If anything, Marcus's efforts stood out, not on the battlefield, but in managing all these aspects. He had handled everything flawlessly, and it was also thanks to Krang's refusal to give unnecessary victory speeches.
I think it's time everyone gets some rest. Is it really more important to listen to the speech of some guy who just stood in the back and watched? You'd be better off using that time to wrap a bandage around a wounded soldier's arm.
Indeed, Krang openly tended to the wounded without hiding his face, to the point that few even recognized him as the prince and the future king. After all, not many soldiers actually knew what Krang looked like. Even though he had the talent to boost the morale and enthusiasm of soldiers through speeches, he believed that wasn't what was important right now. Krang was the kind of person who backed up his words with actions. It wasn't until after the battlefield was tidied up that Enkrid and the others returned. As the healer gave their thanks, Enkrid, lost in thought, asked,
Do you know me?
My son went to the battlefield.
The healer said, limping slightly.
If it weren't for my leg, I would have gone too.
The healer turned their body as they spoke. It wasn't a thank you for saving their son. Their son had already died. No matter what was said, no words could bring back the dead, and the healer's heart was torn apart. Still, there was at least a small comfort. If this battle had ended in defeat, their son's death would have been meaningless. That was the only solace they could find. Everyone else was wrapped in the joy of victory. The triumph of the Civil War, survival from an impossible battle, the joy of those who lived. All of these things filled the palace and the capital. Rumors of a coronation ceremony were spreading. Artisans were gathering, claiming they were going to build a monument to commemorate the coronation in the heart of the capital. Soon, festivals would be held, and once everything was in order, banquets would be held day after day to celebrate the victories and assign rewards. Yet there were still those who had lost family and loved ones.
May you rest in peace.
The healer silently said this to his son as they left. Enkrid watched the healer's back before heading to his bed. The whisper that the son who went to the battlefield had died lingered in his ears. Even Esther was so exhausted that she didn't leave Enkrid's side, having transformed into a panther. After a good night's sleep, Enkrid awoke and practiced the isolation technique as usual to loosen up his body. Even though there was talk of rewards being given, everything around them had to be settled first. That would take at least 10 days. Enkrid continued with his usual routine. He visited Odd Eye, feeding him a mix of meat and vegetables instead of hay, and also met with Andrew and the trainees. The number of trainees had gone from 5 to 4.
Even with divine power, a severed leg doesn't grow back.
One of the trainees had lost a leg. That's how fierce the battle was. While Enkrid was cutting through the waves of Spectre Horde, the soldiers weren't standing idle either. Enkrid nodded. These were people who had chosen to step forward of their own will. He respected that choice.
He said he wishes he could be like Frog.
Andrew also spoke matter-of-factly. Neither Enkrid nor Andrew had lived easy lives that could be shaken by just one event.
Never again.
Andrew spoke, gazing into the air, his voice steady. After letting out a single word, Andrew continued, almost as if making a vow to himself. It wasn't a promise directed at Enkrid, but a vow to himself.
I won't watch my people get hurt again.
Enkrid nodded. The trainee who had lost his leg was said to have become a candidate for a butler. He didn't seem particularly down about it.
Once I get used to it, I think I'll manage with a prosthetic. I figure it's better than being dead.
He was a tough-minded fellow. Enkrid patted him on the shoulder once and turned away.
Thanks for saving me.
You saved yourself by fighting well.
Enkrid answered the trainee's thanks in a calm tone. It was sincere. He believed that anyone who saved their own life with their own hands deserved credit. The trainee had a fiancé, too. Enkrid had seen her in passing, and she was a spirited woman.
Missing a leg? Well, I'll just take care of us then.
She was a strong woman. Krang was so busy that Enkrid hadn't even caught a glimpse of him. Marcus, too, was nowhere to be seen. A few days later, Asia came by, but Enkrid wasn't in any condition to spar seriously. When he cautiously mentioned this,
"Is fighting the only thing you think of?"
Asia responded, looking almost exasperated. Enkrid changed the subject.
Is everything quiet at the palace?
What do you think? I've filled it with my own people, so there's no one to make any complaints. A few foolish nobles are still around, but they'll deal with that. What's more urgent is preparing for the coronation. They're going on about how it needs to be the grandest ceremony ever, spewing nonsense like that.
The Krang that Enkrid knew was a broad-minded and great person. But people change. Had he not seen people change before? He had seen mercenaries who were willing to risk their lives for a friend end up stabbing that same comrade in the back for a single gold coin. He had seen a father throw his adopted son to monsters just to survive. That man had been good at first, but changed when the situation became dire. They say after 20 days surrounded by monsters, anyone could break. Enkrid had challenged that man to a duel. He lost, but he killed him. That had happened. So Krang could change too. A grand coronation. That time had come. They had won, the victory had been declared, and with the triumph of the Civil War, Krang had become the rightful heir to the throne. Enkrid found himself thinking he wanted to return to the border guard. The sky was dark. It looked like it might rain again.
"How's your body holding up?"
Asia asked.
Decent enough. I'm not in shape to bet half my life on it, but I think I could manage a light spar.
A proper spar was out of the question, but a light contest of wits seemed manageable. It was probably best to rest, but right now he felt like moving his body more. Asia nodded and pulled out a wooden sword.
You said a light spar, right?
Enkrid remarked when he saw it, causing Asia to tilt her head in confusion. Wasn't it just a wooden sword?
"A light spar."
Enkrid pulled out a long sword he had picked up to replace his broken silver one. He had spent 2 days sharpening it.
"How is this light?"
Asia spoke as she pointed her sword, while Rem, Ragna, Audin, Jackson, and Pell watched. Pell had introduced himself immediately after the battle, jumping right into the group.
I'm Pell, the shepherd of the wilderness.
With light brown hair, slightly taller than Kreis, and a well-trained body and posture.
I saw your performance on the battlefield.
Everyone gave him a look as if to say, "So what?" But Pell had a thick skin. Shepherds are generally known for being bold, and among the shepherds of the wilderness, Pell was the one who insisted on using a sword.
Let me observe,
he said confidently. Enkrid recognized Pell and was slightly surprised, but nodded indifferently. To be honest, he found it interesting.
That shepherd from back then.
His stance had changed since before. Even the aura he exuded had shifted, a sign that his skills had improved. As Pell continued to watch, the light sparring match came to an end. Having already seen him fight on the battlefield,
amazing.
Pell honestly thought there wasn't anyone with greater talent than himself. Back then, he had sought Enkrid out for a duel in the middle of the night, and even though he had lost, believed he had since caught up. But now, Enkrid's sword was even stronger and sharper than it had been. Incomparable to back then, Enkrid had grown far more than Pell had since their last encounter. Above all, just watching that man's sword made his blood boil. Though naturally combative, this was something different. He wanted to fight him so badly that his hand hovered near his sword.
When will your body fully recover?
Pell asked.
You're last in line, kid.
Heh, brother, you've got to wait your turn. There's no order when meeting the Lord, but there's an order here.
Go drink some more goat's milk.
"Pass me first, then talk."
The order was Rem, Audin, Ragna, Jackson, and Dunbachel. Teresa was busy observing every movement Enkrid made. Jackson shot a glance at him but remained silent.
All right, let's do that.
Pell couldn't argue anymore. Everyone throwing comments at him wasn't easy to dismiss. He couldn't even gauge Dunbachel's strength as a warrior beast. Would he lose? The thought never crossed his mind. The best food is always saved for last. Beating them all down, and then facing Enkrid wouldn't be bad either. Pell believed in his own talent. He thought that in 6 months at most he would catch up to all of them. Everyone falls into delusions sometimes. After his sparring match with Asia, Enkrid felt his body still creaking here and there. Though he had recovered quickly, he wasn't in perfect condition yet. 5 days later, when his body had mostly healed, a summons came from the palace.
You must attend.
The summons came directly from Marquis Octo.
Aren't you busy? You came all the way here just to summon me.
The Marquis was astonished that the man before him did not realize his own importance.
Become aware of your position.
Enkrid had now become someone even the Marquis could not casually order around. If you had to name just one hero responsible for the victory in the Civil War, who would it be? Anyone would say the name Enkrid. More than just a hero who saved the nation, he was now known as the Demon Slayer. The king himself called him a friend, and he had proven himself more skilled than anyone in the Knight's orders. And what about his subordinates?
Every one of them has impressive skills.
Ordinarily, such capable individuals would belong to a knightly order, wouldn't they? But they were all connected through Enkrid. The politically astute Marquis Octo knew instinctively, if they lost Enkrid, they'd lose all of them. He also knew that some nobles had tried to approach them discreetly. Naturally, they had all failed.
And now you want me to take your gold and start swinging an axe? Do you even know what my nickname is? Go look it up before you come back.
Rem, the noble slayer. He boldly declared that he was a man capable of beheading nobles, sending chills down the spines of every aristocrat. He was a madman. Jackson was completely unreachable. Auden brushed it off with a smile, claiming he was simply following the teachings of the gods. Ragna elegantly ignored every summons. At least Rem and Auden had agreed to meet.
But why is no one summoning me?
Dunbachel voiced a small question, though no one gave her an answer. It wasn't that Marquis Octo didn't want to, but
there's no need to risk leaving a bad impression by meddling.
The Marquis was wise. Enkrid, for his part, didn't pay much attention to it.
A coronation will be held,
the Marquis said, to which Enkrid merely nodded. Had his friend changed after all? The friend who once dreamed of something greater than the throne, who looked toward a distant future, was he now intoxicated by the crown and the throne? The image of the healer who had lost his son came to mind for no reason. 5 days later, Enkrid stood not in the palace banquet hall, but at the platform built in the heart of the capital. A small tower had been constructed on the platform. Krang stood upon it, smiling. He had much to do. The coronation, distributing honors, future plans, the fallout from the Count's actions, the chimeras, and the unrest in the demon realm. None of these were matters that could be ignored. Yet, the first thing Krang chose to do was this. He had a tower built with the names of people, fallen soldiers, inscribed on it. Even discovering all the names must have been a tremendous task. There were surely those who disliked the event itself. But still, it was done.
Would you speak before me?
A spell-enhanced object, used for amplifying voices, was placed before the memorial. Krang called Enkrid to speak. Enkrid climbed the platform. Standing before the amplification object, he tried to choose his words but then gave up. The healer had lost his son. Did what his son did have no meaning? That's something only time would tell. No one knows the future. But Enkrid hoped that, to the son himself, it had meant something.
To the people.
Enkrid uttered one word, pausing to take a breath before continuing.
To friendship, to family, to loved ones, to those who died to protect those behind them.
Some in the crowd shed tears, while others smiled. Krang then stepped forward.
I honor those who died in my place.
He began to recite the names inscribed on the memorial.
Vin, Lokteen, Laksan.
The memorial reading was long. At the end of it, Krang calmly declared that he had become the new king.
In accordance with the righteous will and purpose, I declare myself the new king of Nerilia. I am Kadianath Rongdias Neril.
The queen, without saying a word, placed the crown upon his head. Applause rang out. There were no cheers. What could one call this? A memorial coronation. Thus, Krang honored the fallen as he received his crown. From the beginning of the event, the rain had been falling steadily. Krang was drenched by it, just like on the battlefield. It seemed to rain often. The pouring rain enveloped the shoulders of those who had lost family, loved ones, and friends.
A banquet? Tell them to process another document instead of wasting time on that.
What is a throne? What is a crown? At this point, Krang could answer with certainty.
It's a place perfect for dying of overwork.
There was a lot of work. Too much. So much that it felt like his head was going to explode if he had to handle it all alone. But it was work, so it had to be done. Krang cut down on sleep, which ended up causing trouble for the royal chef.
You should eat properly, shouldn't you?
Marcus said from the side. With a sandwich in his mouth, Krang widened his eyes at Marcus. He spoke with his eyes instead of his mouth.
Are you really telling me to take my time lighting candles, holding a knife and fork, slicing meat, and chatting with other nobles when there's this much work piling up? Forget it.
Marcus saw a new side of Krang. This person was a workaholic. Of course, he had his reasons for being this way, but still, someone had to say it.
Some nobles are trying to approach Enkrid.
Krang, who had his head buried in documents with a sandwich in his mouth, lifted his head again. Marcus continued calmly.
They probably want to have the hero of the nation on their side.
Even though they had warded off many, how many nobles still remained in the capital? It was easily more than 100, and if you included nobles from other regions? Not all of them were shrewd and intelligent. Some were loyal, but with the civil war over, they would surely be looking to secure their own interests. And what was the best way to secure the largest share? To have the king himself call you a close friend. The hero of the nation for whom the king had ceded his place during the coronation. If you could keep such a person in your domain, what if you could bring them under your command? Especially since their current affiliation was vague at best. Enkrid was merely a company commander of the border guard, so they'd try every trick in the book, starting with using beautiful women.
People are bound to change,
Marcus said. Krang swallowed the last of his sandwich and met Marcus' eyes for a moment. Both of them, with dark circles under their eyes, looked at each other and suddenly burst out laughing.
Foo-hoo-hoo.
Some people do change, but not Enkrid.
Let them suffer. He'll handle it on his own.
Krang didn't care at all about the nobles who were trying to cozy up to Enkrid. There was something else he wanted to ask Marcus.
But are you really okay with this? Pardon? Oh, you mean the title? Yes, I'm fine with it.
Krang nodded.
It seems even Marquis Vizar sought out Enki. He's lost his touch a bit.
Krang truly didn't care. It made sense. Anyone who had gone through what he had with Enkrid would feel the same.
So the nobles wanting to throw a banquet.
As Marcus started to speak, Krang cut him off.
Can we seize some of their assets?
With force?
Yeah.
Is becoming a tyrant your next goal?
Would it really matter if he became a tyrant? For a moment, Krang was tempted.
Why is the royal family so poor?
As soon as the queen had ascended the throne, she said her farewells and left gracefully. She even took the court wizard with her. Krang had decided to think of her as gone altogether. Recently, his biggest concern was finding a way to accumulate wealth. If he knew Kreis well, he would have wanted to appoint him as the finance minister on the spot. Of course, this was also a mess of his own making. Krang had gone a bit overboard with some of his policies. The most critical was the issue of the king's personal guard. Krang had replaced the king's guard knights.
I've heard they maintain their knightly status under the condition that they never leave the royal palace. But is that something they really want to do?
The knights maintaining their status through a combination of magical power and the mystery of will had to figure out the true meaning behind the king's words. They must have wondered what he was even talking about. They had been guarding the king's side for 3 generations. Their grandfather and father had walked the same path. The curse on their bloodline was both a shackle and a binding.
Are you asking me this seriously?
When the guard knight asked in return, Krang released him from his curse. He granted him freedom, telling him to do what he truly wanted and go wherever he wished. The royal guard was replaced by the previous royal guard. The man in the gray helmet knelt and even shed tears.
I swear to protect you with my life. Even in death, I will guard you.
In this way, Krang re-established the royal guard, including Matthew and others who had stood by his side. He increased the number of guards and raised their wages. In addition, he began to patch up the holes in the defenses of the royal palace.
It's no wonder we're running low on gold coins.
Even after selling off part of the national treasury, this is the state we're in. Krang didn't look back. He didn't even have time to regret. He too had learned something from Enkrid.
Let's just focus on what needs to be done right now.
Even if the continent were to perish tomorrow, Enkrid would be the guy sharpening his sword. What's the problem if the treasury is emptied a bit, as long as people can live well and eat well? It was an extreme thought, and he pushed forward with it. There was no one to stop him either. As a result, the awarding ceremony where they were supposed to honor Enkrid's achievements had been delayed. That was the only reason Enkrid was still staying in the capital. Rem fully understood the difference between himself now and back when he first became a member of the Madman platoon.
How did it end up like this?
His skills, which had stagnated while wandering the continent, had improved. There were several reasons for this, but the top three were Ragna, Jackossen, and Audin. Fighting with those bastards over and over again had made him stronger, simply because he didn't want to lose.
What a messed up situation.
As he was thinking this, his eyes met with Ragna, who was shirtless and swinging his sword.
What are you looking at, you barbarian cripple who can't even walk by himself?
Rem chastised his own brain for briefly thinking he had those bastards to thank. The truth was, the biggest reason for his growth was Enkrid. Teaching while learning himself and watching Enkrid's growth left no room for him to slack off.
Mess around and you'll die.
Rem roughly muttered to Ragna and began stretching himself. He had expected to be bedridden for a month after overusing his sorcery, but he recovered quickly. His body had grown stronger because his skills had improved. After all, sorcery is based on the body. Enkrid, listening to the friendly banter between the two, was busy checking and repeating his movements. Watching him, Rem approached.
You called it a new will, right? Show me.
Now that he could move around a bit, a spar wasn't out of the question. Enkrid, thinking today was that day, grabbed his sword. When he went to the blacksmith to have his broken silver sword fixed, he was told it was impossible. The core had been completely destroyed, so he'd asked them to just melt it down and was now wielding an ordinary longsword. He didn't want to blame his weapon, but he sure wished he had a sword of silver's quality.
Do it right,
Rem said. Enkrid did exactly that. He focused his will into his eyes and held it. It was the ability to see a moment ahead. It was the perfect manifestation of will that aligned with the trapping sword. Enkrid glimpsed into the future. He saw Rem's breathing, his shoulders, hands, and feet. Rem would swing his hammer as if throwing it with his left hand. Then he'd swing the axe diagonally. The first hammer strike would be at its usual speed, but the next axe swing would be 1.5 times faster. It was a technique that only someone with complete mastery of dual wielding could pull off. The brief glimpse of the future played out exactly as expected. Rem's hammer came flying. Even though Enkrid's sword was longer, he stepped forward. He crossed his wrists, raising the sword to block Rem's hammer-wielding wrist. At the same time, he stepped on Rem's foot, intending to drive his knee into his groin. Getting in this close would leave Rem with no choice but to throw a punch with the hand holding the axe, but Enkrid would be so close that Rem wouldn't be able to swing it properly.
I'll endure that punch.
It was a matter of sacrificing flesh to break bone. In less than a breath, their weapons, hands, and feet clashed. Thud! Thwack! Crack! After closing the gap, Enkrid pulled back and looked at Rem.
How did you do that?
Did you think that made you invincible?
It was an instinct and countermeasure as sharp as a beast's. Enkrid realized once again, this guy was crazy but impressive. The trapping sword was a correct sword technique. It was a style that led the opponent into a mind game, pushing them into positions he desired, and it harmonized perfectly with his ability to see a moment ahead. However, Rem didn't stick to the predicted movements and changed his actions. Instead of swinging the axe, he let it go, blocked Enkrid's knee with his palm, and slammed his forehead forward. Enkrid had no choice but to respond instinctively. The final thud was the sound of their foreheads colliding. Both of their foreheads turned bright red in the center, likely to swell into bumps. If someone moves instinctively before you can read and analyze their actions, how can you anticipate that? At that point, the only thing you could rely on was ingrained technique. Rem inwardly admired Enkrid's response to his headbutt, but he kept his mouth shut. He had just figured out a way to break Enkrid's newly awakened will after days of contemplation. He didn't want to show that he had put thought into it. If he praised him too easily, Enkrid might lose his drive for improvement. Of course, that wouldn't happen, but after some self-justification, Rem spoke.
Look, it can be broken like this, so don't use it recklessly.
Next up was Audin.
Brother, any technique has its gaps.
He broke Enkrid's will in an even more simple and brute way. He just charged straight in and engaged in a close-quarters brawl. The brute strength of this oafish bear was even greater than Enkrid, who had used the heart of great strength. With smooth, powerful movements, Audin attempted to dislocate Enkrid's shoulder by applying a joint lock. Enkrid, applying what he had learned, bent his fingers and struck Audin's palm upward to break free. Their sparring continued in much the same way. Both ended up rolling on the ground covered in dust. In the end, Enkrid lost.
What will you do when I get this close?
Audin asked, his cheekbone bruised and one of his eyes swollen shut. Enkrid's knee, which had been locked in a hold, was on the verge of breaking. If any more pressure was applied, it would snap. So he conceded defeat. In exchange, he had left Audin with a nice blue mark around his eye and cheekbone. Enkrid nodded. He still had a lot to learn. Ragna stepped forward as well. He used an even simpler method, a strike so fast and powerful that even seeing it coming didn't mean you could block it. To be honest, it was even more terrifying than the swordsmanship he had seen from Learbart.
Are you trying to send him to the afterlife?
Audin, witnessing this, was impressed.
That guy's seriously insane.
Rem insulted, calling him even more broken-headed than himself.
As long as he didn't die, it's fine,
Ragna said calmly. Enkrid wiped the cold sweat from his neck. He had barely blocked the strike, but the force had driven the sword halfway into his own chest. If not for the bandage-like armor he had been wearing just in case, he would have been bleeding. Not that he had any complaints. He understood what they were trying to tell him.
No matter the technique, you have to use it tirelessly until it becomes part of you.
In reality, the three were busy proving that they still hadn't fallen behind, but Enkrid took it in his own way. As they say, if the interpretation of a dream is better than the dream itself, everything is good. While they were immersed in training, a young boy entered, cautiously watching them.
Excuse me, are you the demon slayer, the hero of the nation, the protector of the border guard, the king's friend, and the free knight Enkrid?
Enkrid doubted his ears for a moment. Weren't there a few too many strange titles mixed in? He had heard rumors about the praises he was receiving after the battle, but he figured it was better to focus on training rather than paying attention to all of them.
I thought they just called me the Immortal Axe.
Rem also had the nickname Noble Slayer floating around. It was because he spoke so menacingly to any nobles who tried to get close to him. The shadow walking guard, that was Jackson. Then there was the white lion beast, Dunbachel. Even though she was a beast woman, her appearance resembled a lion, so the nickname stuck, though Dunbachel didn't seem to mind it. Ragna was called the Merciless Sword. Of course, he didn't care much.
But doesn't Guide Ragna suit me better?
However, sometimes when he said things like that, it made Enkrid think Ragna was even crazier than Rem. Audin had a nickname similar to his old one. Was it the Giant Bear? He had heard people say he looked like that from afar. Audin would only smile without a word, though he didn't seem particularly pleased. Enkrid looked at the young boy who had called his name.
Just call me Enkrid or Mad Company Commander. I think that's more accurate.
The official name was the Independent Combat Company of the Border Guard, but by now even Enkrid himself referred to his unit as the Mad Company. After all, weren't they all lunatics? It wasn't something he could change just because he was the only one who seemed normal. The nervous boy spoke, clearly tense.
My master wishes to meet you, and if you have the time. Oh, if it's inconvenient, I can return when you do have time, or if you could just let me know when you might be available.
Enkrid didn't want to make the boy any more uncomfortable. He gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and spoke softly.
Who is your master?
Oh, it's Baron Somerset.
It was a name he had never heard before. Curious, Enkrid nodded. He sincerely didn't want to trouble the boy any further. The boy, full of admiration and shaking with nervousness, led the way, his legs trembling as he walked. Enkrid followed him.
Another noble?
Rem called from behind. Enkrid waved him off. It was better for him to quietly go and deal with this than to let Rem cause trouble. After all, it was someone who had come looking for him. How many nobles were in the capital? Not all of them were in their right minds. It was something that could be figured out with just a little thought.
How about it? If you come to my territory, I can personally grant you the title of Protector of the Estate, along with a manor.
It started with that man, Baron Somerset. Enkrid responded calmly, trying to be as gentle as possible.
I'm not interested.
It was a situation he had never experienced before. Had he ever received this much attention from nobles in his life? Enkrid simply expressed his disinterest to push the man away. Baron Somerset was at a loss for words, mainly due to the firm tone that shut down his proposal. He didn't realize that this was Enkrid's way of being polite. Still, deep down, he couldn't help but feel slighted. He knew Enkrid was incredibly skilled. But could anyone really live their life wielding just a sword? Everyone needed a background. If you were to rise in the capital in the future, wouldn't that be the way to go? It was natural to see the world based on what you knew, so Baron Somerset thought this was the logical thing.
Well then, I'll be off.
Enkrid gave a light nod and turned to leave. The young boy could see his master trembling with frustration, and yet the hero who saved the nation looked so impressive as he walked away.
So cool.
He says what he needs to and walks away, regardless of whether the person is a noble or not. How many kids wouldn't admire such a figure? That admiration extended to others as well. There was even a group among the palace maids who debated whether Enkrid or Jackson had the more handsome face. Meanwhile, Auden, Rem, Dunbachel, and Teresa were also frequently mentioned in such conversations. Enkrid had already made a name for himself among noble women in the past, but now it was beyond that. There wasn't a noble in the capital who didn't know of Enkrid and the name of the Mad Company. Some even brought their daughters to meet him. Enkrid, out of respect for Krang, met with them all.
This is my daughter.
She was quite pretty. Her shyly bowed head made her seem pure. Enkrid glanced at her exposed arm and thought to himself that she probably couldn't even hold a rapier properly, so he declined.
I'm busy.
Busy with what?
Training.
Though some polite words were exchanged, the essence of the conversation was just that. If some brought their daughters, others suggested he become their heir.
I have no children.
This particular man looked to be around 70, a scrawny old fellow. He claimed to have never spent his wealth recklessly, and said that siding with the king this time was the biggest gamble of his life. After dealing with him and sending him off, Jackson approached and said,
He has 6 children, but apparently he wasn't satisfied with any of them and kicked them all out.
He was the stingiest of the stingy, a noble who only ate black bread instead of white, even in his own home. This man had come offering his entire fortune. No, he even brought the deed with him, saying all Enkrid had to do was stamp it. But Enkrid didn't have a seal. After all, he was a commoner. A few more nobles came after that as well. At least it was only the more noble figures coming to visit, excluding the nobodies and hangers-on. Still, there were some who stood out.
Let me make it clear beforehand, I'm not a man of Aspen, and this is just a job. So, there's no need to cut me down or beat me up. My only task is to deliver their message and get your reply.
The man was sweating buckets under the shade of a tree, clearly nervous. He appeared to be a sheriff working in the capital. Although he was a lower-ranked noble, he made additional income through various commissions like this one. Judging by his attitude, pleading for understanding as a mere messenger, it seemed like he had some kind of vulnerability. Enkrid nodded.
They've promised you a rank above Duke in Aspen.
Was the Civil War truly just Norilia's problem? No, it wasn't. Every surrounding nation had an interest in it. Aspen being the first to make such an offer was, in a way, predictable. What kind of person was Enkrid? Was he someone loyal to his country, or was there something he desired?
They also said that, if you wish, a marriage with the princess could be arranged.
Enkrid began to feel concerned about the sheriff's dehydration. The man was sweating so much that it had begun to pool.
I refuse.
Yes, I understand.
The sheriff didn't even seem to consider persuading him further. Piles of gold, beautiful women, this and that had begun to grate on his nerves after a while.
Why don't you just cut off a few of their arms? That'll stop them from coming.
Rem advised. Enkrid was so fed up that the suggestion actually sounded appealing.
Wouldn't it be better to just ignore them?
Ragna chimed in. It was a softer approach, but the problem was that these noble brats didn't come alone. They always brought servants or maids with them. Do nobles ever suffer? It's the servants who endure the hardships. Seeing a young kid trembling as they looked for him made it hard to just ignore them entirely.
Haha, all you need is prayer to calm your mind. You can pray with those who come too, brother captain.
If the first mention of prayer was genuine, the latter suggestion to pray together could very well involve fists and kicks. Enkrid thought this method was no different from Rem's approach. Dunbachel and Teresa had no interest in such matters. Jackson secretly thought it would be easier to just kill them quietly, but he didn't say it out loud. He had a good sense of judgment. Esther, on the other hand, simply watched with lazy eyes.
You should be cautious since you've caught the eye of a demon.
When she said that, Enkrid's reaction stirred something inside her.
Strong, right?
He was asking about the demon's power.
Wouldn't be easy to win.
He seemed to be looking forward to fighting the demon.
You lunatic.
Esther, momentarily turning into a human, spat out the insult before transforming back into a panther. She muttered to herself, but if she didn't voice it aloud, the frustration would linger in her chest. To maintain the order of the world of spells, such frustrations couldn't be allowed to build up. Enkrid wasn't the type to scold her for suddenly saying something like that anyway. In the end, Enkrid decided to deal with the nobles on his own terms, without taking anyone's advice. Though he was still annoyed, he even considered escaping to the border guard for a while, just to get away from it all.
It's been a while. The hero who saved the nation, the demon slayer, and the border guards.
That's enough, thank you.
It was someone familiar. Enkrid knew that if he forgot this woman's name again, her beautiful face would twist into that of an enraged ghoul, so he spoke up.
Lady Visar.
You haven't forgotten my name, have you?
How could I?
Enkrid wasn't particularly known for his eloquence, but he was skilled enough to navigate situations without directly saying her name. Kin Visar, often hailed as the most beautiful woman in the capital, couldn't press the matter any further. After all, she wasn't alone, and the man before her had left no openings in his words. There was no way she could recklessly demand him to say her name aloud. It would be improper, and it would lower her dignity as a noblewoman.
It feels like he might have forgotten, though.
Still, she had her suspicions. It was a reasonable doubt. Enkrid had, after all, forgotten her name amidst the repetitive interactions of the day. But why had she come all the way to the training ground? As she stood there watching, 5 attendants and an old man approached behind her.
I hear you've had a lot of troublesome visitors lately.
It was Marquis Visser. Kin bowed her head and stepped aside.
There's no need to vacate the area, and I won't take much of your time.
Marquis Visser was an efficient man by nature. He disliked wasting time. That was what set him apart from the other visitors. Rather than sending attendants and maids, he came with his own people and entered the training grounds himself. In front of Rem and the others, the Marquis spoke.
I've heard you've reached a respectable age, Mary Kin.
Enkrid wasn't a fool. Even Chryse acknowledged his sharp mind. Kin, without showing any embarrassment, bowed her head. The Marquis, too, seemed to think there was nothing wrong with his proposal.
My title of Marquis will pass to Mark.
Considering everything he said, it was clear what the offer meant. Kin Visar was a symbol that would tie Enkrid to the Visar family. What was the benefit of that? Once the honors ceremony began, the Visar family would be elevated to a duke. They had enough influence, and Marcus Visser was one of the key figures who made significant contributions in the recent battle. If he became the head of the Centerpole family, the title of duke would be certain. Align yourself with the only duke house in the kingdom. Do whatever you desire, and there will be no coercion. This was the hidden meaning behind the proposal. Marquis Visser was no fool either. He had no intention of forcing or pressuring Enkrid into anything. All he asked was for their connection to grow deeper, promising the kingdom's most beautiful woman and anything else he might need in return. That was the Marquis's proposal. He could have offered any other daughter instead of Kin, but he didn't. Kin Visser was his gesture of respect. Even Krang would have found the offer bold enough to make him think, what if? Enkrid stared at the Marquis for a moment before turning his gaze toward Kin Visar. Daughters of noble families were often bound by arranged marriages. It was an encouraged practice in their society. But was it something enjoyable? Was it fun? Enkrid didn't know Kin Visar very well, but he did see her as a person, not just a woman. They'd spoken a few times, briefly. From what he'd seen, Kin Visar didn't seem like someone who wished to live as the lady of a grand house. His next words could be considered rude, but Enkrid did what he always did. When had he ever lived holding back what he needed to say for the sake of politeness?
What's your dream?
So he asked. Kin Visar, who had been expressionless, looked at Enkrid. She was a symbol, just a subject of an arranged marriage. That was all. He didn't need to harbor any affection for her, and she didn't need to do anything. But what dream? It was an inappropriate question for the situation.
Don't you have a dream? Something you want to do?
Kin Visar was taken aback. She also thought,
This guy is truly unpredictable.
Marquis Vizar said nothing. He wasn't one to show his emotions. Was she allowed to answer?
I think you do.
Although born into a noble family, she hadn't lived her life confined to the household. She had things she wanted to do, but this wasn't something to say in front of the head of her family. In the Vizar family, the Marquis' word was law. If he said to marry for the sake of the family, then that's what she had to do.
My dream is to stand alongside the hero who saved the nation.
Kin gave the standard answer. No one said anything. The Marquis simply watched in silence.
Something you actually want to do.
Enkrid asked again in his sharp, curt way, and Kin began to sweat. It felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff.
Go ahead and answer,
the Marquis said, staring directly at Enkrid. Only then did Kin carefully speak.
I'm interested in working with gemstones, and I've been doing it on a small scale.
For something small, I hear you've sought out a fairly sizable trading company.
That was the Marquis speaking. He already knew. Kin Vizar had a remarkable eye for gemstones. She also influenced the fashion and trends in the capital. This was due to her innate sense and the refined taste she'd developed growing up in the Vizar household. She was also a natural talent, even deserving to be called a genius.
Is that what you want to do?
The Marquis asked. Kin didn't know how to answer here. As she hesitated, Enkrid spoke on her behalf.
Why bother asking? You're just being stubborn because you're old. Stop being so stubborn and stop pestering her.
Most of the attendants gasped. Hadn't he crossed the line? But no one dared to challenge him. Enkrid alone was fearsome, but looking at those standing behind him, it was clear why no one would dare. Rem was grinning as he licked his axe blade.
That's disgusting.
Ragna scolded him.
Don't mind it.
The two immediately started bickering.
So I'm being stubborn because I'm old?
The Marquis blinked as he asked, devoid of any trace of humor. It might have felt intimidating, but compared to Count Molson, who had been possessed by a demon, this was nothing.
A sword is all I need to prove myself,
Enkrid replied. That was the end of the conversation. Unlike the other nobles, there was no reason to entertain him further. Enkrid genuinely believed that. Be it Marquis Vizar or Somerset, they were all the same.
Well then.
They were just annoying people interrupting his training. As Enkrid bowed his head politely and turned away, the Marquis glared at him for a moment before turning his head as well. He seemed quite upset.
Still, he's a Marquis. You sure it's fine? Or should I just slice him up?
Rem suggested again, dragging the edge of his hand across his neck in a slicing motion. Enkrid ignored him.
It's a waste of time.
He meant it. There were so many new things he had learned and realized, and they made his body itch with excitement. And it made sense, considering that Enkrid hadn't had any talent with the sword when he first picked one up. But then, he suddenly awakened will, applied it, and even managed to mimic Ragna's sword techniques. Now that he could feel the changes in his body, every time he swung his sword, it was 10 times more fun than before. Of course, to someone like Pell, who didn't know any better, Enkrid just looked like a lunatic obsessed with training. After seeing Kin Vizar's appearance, Pell glanced at Enkrid, thinking,
Is that guy's body really made of 2 stones and a stick?
Is he a eunuch?
So he asked Dunbachel next to him.
I think so too. He doesn't even fall for me.
Pell looked at Dunbachel, who smelled like old sweat, and thought to himself,
Even I wouldn't fall for you.
The beast woman beside him really hated bathing.